I miss the PlayStation Vita. Now, this is gonna be a very nostalgic video for me, just straight up. So there's gonna be a lot of gushing, there may even be some tears of joy because I have not just a lot of fun and nostalgic memories with the system, but just a lot of emotional attachment to it, to put it lightly. Where do we even begin with this system? Now, I know it probably would have made more sense to make a I miss PlayStation Portable video first, which I do plan to make because that system I have just as much nostalgia and emotional attachment to, but I don't know, I just felt like making the PlayStation Vita video first for some reason. Now, one of the things that I've always loved most about the PlayStation Vita is, I mean, just the design of the system itself, and furthermore, let me just go ahead and turn it on so we can bask in the amazing menu music together. Just the experience of turning on the PlayStation Vita, you have the little PlayStation logo popping up, which is very reminiscent of like the PS4 when you turn that on, because obviously this released around the same time. I always loved that about the PS4 and the PS5, by the way, just something about turning it on and just seeing nothing besides the black background and the white PS4/PS5 logo, just waiting for it to turn on, and then it's there, you know, just all of a sudden, it's just the anticipation of the build-up, and then finally it's there. And hold on, let me make sure that my volume's up so we can all bask in this moment and experience it together. Okay, you got the little thing at the top, you slide it down. I don't know how well it's picking it up, but let me just turn it up even more so we can just experience it for a moment together, okay? Here it is. This is the part that I love. It's getting ready to build up. Wait for it. There it is. It's so good, man. I love the PlayStation Vita so much. This system has so much personality, and while we're not going to spend too much time looking at the actual system itself, because we're going to be going on to, just talk about the system and gush a bit, but I always love the background with, like, the bubble setup and everything like that. Now, normally, when you turn on the system, it just kind of has, like, a gray background, but that's one of the cool things about the PlayStation Vita, is that you can, like, change the color of the backgrounds and stuff, so I always went for the blue, just because I always felt like blue was obviously just like the definitive PlayStation background. I mean, obviously during like the XMB days with like the PS3 and the PSP, it could, just kind of change on its own depending on a couple of factors. So whether that be the color that you set it to yourself, or like what the time of the day or the year is or whatever. But, from the PS4 and onwards, I've said this before, how I'm just a very vanilla guy. Like with whatever a system or a family of systems tends to ship with, that's what I'm gonna rock. So in the case of the PlayStations, I always just go for the blue. Obviously with the PS5, it's a bit different. Now it's a bit more of that, I don't even know what color you would call it necessarily, but it's definitely, I don't know, it's not necessarily bronze, but it's not necessarily purple. It's just like somewhere in there. But anyway, we're gonna go ahead and power this off just so we can go ahead and talk about it without draining the battery, because I do plan to play this thing a lot later. It's kind of sad because I don't even have like an actual PlayStation Vita case. I have this third-party Temu looking Nintendo Switch case. I don't like, I'm pretty sure that this is like one of those random free items I got from Temu just for signing up. So it's one of those things like, hey, it's a free case. I never leave the house, so I don't have a reason to like put my Switch in it, because my Switch is always docked. I like never use it in handheld mode unless it's one of those situations where I'm playing Pokemon I literally cannot talk today. Pokemon Cafe Remix, since that's like a handheld only game and I play that game on my Switch. I know I could play it on my phone, but I'd rather just play it on my Switch. When I'm playing video games, if they're only on mobile, like Dragon Ball Legends and Injustice Mobile, which let me just flex this real quick. I've had the same Injustice Mobile account since 2013, and I've been using it since then. I still grind out all the challenges and everything weekly to this day. In those rare examples, I will, play those games on mobile, but again, it's only 2 games on mobile that I play, those being Injustice and Dragon Ball Legends, but otherwise, yeah, I'd rather play something like that on my Switch, so I'm truly relaxed. But anyway, talking about the PlayStation Vita, so I guess we'll go ahead and kick things off with the games. And when it comes to the games, that in itself is near impossible to like start with. Like, where do we start? Do we start with the indies that carried on the system after Sony dropped support? Do we start with the console ports? Do we start with the handheld only games? Because if we want to go ahead and talk about the handheld only games, I mean, we have games like Uncharted Golden Abyss, which was basically like Uncharted 1, but on the PlayStation Vita. I mean, obviously it wasn't actually Uncharted 1, but it was, a lot of like similar assets and such, but it was more of like a spin-off. Yet despite the fact that it was technically like a spin-off game, it still felt like a full line, like full mainline Uncharted game. Like there was no corners cut in terms of the graphical fidelity, the set pieces, the voice acting, the animations, the sound quality, the soundtrack, the story, the pacing, everything about it. It felt like a full mainline Uncharted game in every aspect of it. except for the name itself. And then you had games like Killzone Mercenary, which rivals the PS3 games in terms of sheer fidelity. Not to mention just how incredible that game looks. Oh, and the campaign in that game, don't even get me started. It's so good. Resistance Burning Skies. Let me just say RIP Resistance. Sony, please, please, hear my calls, hear my cries. Bring Resistance back. But again, Resistance Burning Skies, always love that game. Then you have games like Call of Duty Black Ops Declassified, which I know we're kind of moving away from the Sony first-party stuff. But don't worry, we're going to get back to that, because there's a lot of amazing first-party Sony games and a lot of variations of the different kinds of games you could expect from Sony there. But then again, you have games like Call of Duty Black Ops Declassified, which was like a cool mashup of like Black Ops 1, but also Modern Warfare 3. Like, you had some MW3 guns, some Black Ops 1 guns, some mechanics from the MW3, from MW3, I don't know. It's like a fun little mashup there, a little quirky, but I always loved that game as well. The campaign was a little short, but it was still fun. The multiplayer, it was a lot of fun, but there was one quirky thing about it, not necessarily a bad or good thing or whatever, but a lot of the maps were basically just smaller iterations of maps we had seen in other games. So Shipment, for example, was just Shipment, but then you look at a map like Nuketown, it was actually just Nuke House, where it was just like, you know, the blue house in the backyard and the front yard there. Not exactly sure why. Obviously, the PS Vita could have handled the entirety of Nuketown. I mean, again, when you look at examples of games like Uncharted Golden Abyss or Killzone Mercenary, or even something like Killzone Mercenary, which I feel like is a much more apt example, you know, there was like pretty sizable maps on that game, much bigger than anything we saw in Black Ops Declassified, so not exactly sure what that was about, but, you know, you had the entire Black Ops experience there between the weapons, the leveling, the attachments. It was all there. It was a complete Call of Duty experience just on the PlayStation Vita, and that was awesome because I talked about this in my I Miss Handheld Gaming video that I made months ago at this point. But I miss this era of handheld gaming where, you know, because a lot of people tried to dunk on me in that video. They were like, what are you talking about, dude? Here, let me get, oh, wait, I was going to say, let me put the nerd glasses on, but I already had the nerd glasses on. What are you talking about, dude? We still have handhelds. Look at the Steam Deck, the ROG Ally, the Nintendo Switch. You're an idiot. But those people clearly did not even watch the video because I already explained my stance on that, as well as acknowledging the Nintendo Switch in that video. But hey, some people would rather just comment without watching the video, which, hey, you know, it's whatever, just feeds into the whole engagement thing, but, you know, whatever, it is what it is. Anyhow, one of the things that I always loved about handhelds in particular, and I guess this is one thing that I should also mention before getting into the games aspect of it, is that when I say handhelds, I don't even just mean handhelds. One of the things that I don't want to say that I don't like about modern handhelds, but one of the things that I miss about older handhelds is how portable they were. Because, well, yes, the Nintendo Switch, the Steam Deck, the ROG Ally, they are handhelds, but they're not portable. Even the Nintendo Switch, I'm sorry, unless you're wearing pants that are big enough to fit Jabba the Hutt, they're not going to fit in your pocket. Whereas something like a DS Lite, a PlayStation Vita back in the day, that could have fit in my pockets. And I could, you know, when I'm going to my aunt's house, when I was going to my grandmother's house, when I was going to visit a friend, just tuck the DS Lite in my pocket, get to my friend's house, whip it out, Mario Kart, let's go. If I want to take my Switch somewhere, alright, let me get the carrying case, let me make sure that I got the game, yup, check, or you can just put it in the Switch before you leave, grab the Joy-Cons, maybe a Pro Controller, maybe a spare pair of Joy-Cons, just in case, you know, it's one of those situations where we got multiple people there, maybe, you know, maybe grab the headphones, shove it in the Switch case there. Some people don't like the way that the Switch feels in the hands, oh, gotta grab the third-party PDP grip, oh, do I got my Joy-Con comfort grip, or just the standard Joy-Con plastic grip, whatever you fancy. And don't get me wrong, I know that's the point of the Switch, it's not necessarily trying to be a pocketable handheld, it's just trying to be a handheld, portable handheld that can either be docked in console mode or it could just be used as a handheld. But again, I love the Nintendo Switch. One of my favorite consoles of all time. Absolutely amazing system, amazing games. Love the Nintendo Switch. It's phenomenal. But I do miss the portable aspect of the handhelds where I know my PS Vita is sitting in like a Switch case right now, but if I wanted to pocket this thing, I could. Another thing that I miss about these, you know, like dedicated handhelds where they're only handheld devices is how we had games where they were clearly trying to emulate console experiences. And, you know, they did it rather well. Like, look at Super Mario Advance on the GBA, for example. That is literally just the SNES Mario games, as well as some of the NES ones, but on GBA. Well, I guess technically they all were the SNES ones. Like, even though you had games like Mario Bros. 2 and 3 there, they were the Super Mario All-Stars version, which were technically from the SNES. So, still, again, fun fact, by the way, the GBA is actually a 32-bit system, which means, in theory, it could run PS1 games if it had more power, because it's the same, like, bit architecture. So, I always just thought that was funny, because obviously we only ever saw, like, 16 16-bit looking games on there, but that's why it was quite possible for there to be some 3D games on the system that were, technologically speaking, probably a bit more advanced than what you might have even seen on like the SNES at the time. Obviously, that was far and few between, but still, we had some rather advanced games on the GBA. Advanced games on the GBA, I did not try that. That was totally accidental. But anyway, you know, and that goes for the PlayStation Vita. You have games like PlayStation All-Stars, Sly Cooper Thieves in Time, where they were literally just PS3 games on the PlayStation Vita, and they worked phenomenally well. Resident Evil Revelations 2, Borderlands 2, The Amazing Spider-Man, like the list goes on. And then you have games that were, like, you had collections of games on here. You had Metal Gear Solid 2 and 3 for the HD collection, the Ratchet & Clank collection, the Sly Cooper collection, the God of War collection, like the list goes on and on. There were so many amazing collections on this system. Yet despite that, despite the fact that it was really fun to play those console experiences on the go, which is kind of like what you get with the Nintendo Switch nowadays, where you have the choice of either playing it on the go or at home, you also had those dedicated handheld games where they just felt like they were designed for a handheld. Because as much as I love the Switch, as much as I love the pick up and play nature of the handheld, it's one of those things where game developers have to make their games, you know, for the most part anyway, when you're playing a Nintendo Switch game, those games are designed with console in mind, and if they're a Switch exclusive for some reason, whether they be indie or third party or whatever, and even if they are designed for the Switch, more likely than not, they're going to be designed in the traditional fashion where, you know, you're going to be expected just to be playing it as a normal console video game, and there's a chance that you might take it on the go. Whereas when you look at a game on the PS Vita, the 2DS, the DS Lite, the PSP, while yes, there was a lot of games that were still trying to emulate that console experience, but, you know, like, they were still making it with the handheld in mind. So going back to what we were talking about with Call of Duty Black Ops Declassified, while that wasn't just trying to be a straight up port like what we were talking about before with Super Mario All-Stars or like Sly Cooper Thieves in Time or all the other collections where it's just console game but on the go, again, Black Ops Declassified, you had something that was trying to get close to that but was still trying to be a handheld game at its core. So you had some of those stripped back elements like Nuke House rather than Nuke Town. That's why the TDMs in that game are only, you know, a fraction of the length of what you would see on the normal console version, because on the normal console versions of Call of Duty, you know, this match can go anywhere from like, what, maybe 7 to 10 minutes at most, but, you know, on the handheld version, you're looking at like, I don't know, 4 to 6, 7-minute matches, maybe tops. And now that we talked about the collection, yeah, Sony's output for this thing was actually pretty good at first until it wasn't. So this was a situation where the sales just weren't meeting their expectations at first, so they kind of just dropped off support. But towards the latter half of their support, I mean, we still got a lot of great collections out of it on the system, obviously, as I discussed before with some of the PS2 collections, as well as the straight up PS3 to PS Vita. Like, there were some games that were cross-buy on PS Vita and then PS3 and PS4 as well, like Entwined, which... oh, Entwined is such an amazing game. If you haven't played it, you have to play it. It's only like maybe an hour and a half long at absolute tops. It is such a beautiful game. It is about a bird and a fish that are in love, but it's just, I don't want to spoil it. Please play it or at least watch a playthrough of it. It is truly magical and had me in tears by the end because it is just... it's one of those games where it's truly a work of art. Like, it's so beautiful, it's a masterpiece. But that was one of those examples of a game that was cross-buy between like PS3, PS Vita, and PS4. And for the most part, a lot of Sony's IPs, even IPs that they tend to neglect nowadays, were well represented on the Vita. It's just a shame because, again, as I had mentioned, partway through the console's life cycle, it was clear to Sony that the sales weren't exactly meeting their expectations, so they just kind of dropped off of support, and from there, it just kind of kept, it was the domino effect, you know. Sony stopped supporting it, eventually the third parties kind of stopped supporting it, but there was still support for a while there, and then by the time the system came to its end, it was just down to the indies to keep it alive, which, hey, you know, the PS Vita still got a lot of the very late indies, you know, like Retro City Rampage and Shakedown Hawaii and stuff like that, you know, those very late games, like those certain developers where they were like, hey, we're gonna be the ones to put the last game out for this system. So, you know, in some cases, those were like the last games to go out on certain systems. So the indies kept this thing alive. And beyond all the indies, there were so many amazing third-party games on this console. In fact, I have a 512 gigabyte SD card in my PS Vita. So what we're gonna do together, just so we can like make sure that no stone is left unturned, we're gonna turn this thing on. And while I'm not gonna run through my entire game collection, we are gonna talk about a decent majority of the games that I feel like are worth mentioning just to prove how much of a powerhouse the PS Vita was. So just starting at the top, I have all of my things labeled in like folders here. So we'll go into the A folder first things first. Assassin's Creed 3 Liberation, essentially Assassin's Creed 3, but again, built with handhelds in mind. So, unlike in a normal Assassin's Creed game where it's just constantly climbing towers, constantly having to sync with the environment, you know, building up the map and stuff like that, it's a more stripped down experience, but it's still, you know, very streamlined, very fun. It's not stripped back in a bad way, it's just stripped back for handheld. So that game, absolute powerhouse. And you had games like Army Corps of Hell, which was super just innovative, a quirky game where it was like sort of like Pikmin, but in hell fighting demons. It was such a cool game. Then you had a lot of really fun mobile ports on here, like Angry Birds Trilogy, Angry Birds Star Wars, Age of Zombies, such an underrated twin stick shooter that I've recommended and talked about in previous videos. And again, going back to what we were talking about the indie support on this thing, you know, like Axiom Verge is sitting here in my A folder, AC Chronicles, which obviously isn't an indie game, but you know, it's like a cool 2D, like almost indie-esque type of Assassin's Creed game there. Always thought those games were really cool. You got games like As Divine Hearts, and then games like A Boy and His Blob, Adventures of Mana, the Atari Flashback Classics, which you know, like every console under the sun has their Atari collection, but the PlayStation Vita had a good amount of those like arcade type collections on there, which I always thought was really cool. Batman Arkham Origins Blackgate, a real cool spin-off of the Batman Arkham Origins, or the Batman Arkham games, and I would highly recommend checking it out. It's more of like a 2.5D type game, but you know, it's definitely worth playing if you're into the Batman Arkham games. It's really cool how they were able to take that classic 3D, you know, like the free-flowing combat type of thing, and convert it into a completely different gameplay style, and yet still have it feel like it belongs within the same storyline continuity and universe, and still fit the theme of like, or fit the tone, I guess, rather, of the Batman Arkham games. Like, it is really good, and it's not that long either. You could definitely beat it within a day or two. Bloodstained, Curse of the Moon, Borderlands 2, which we had already talked about, Black Ops Classified, Dead Nation, which was also another cross-buy game, Disney Epic Mickey 2, the some of the Disgaea games, Dead or Alive 5, the Danganronpa games, Don't Starve. You had a bunch of Dynasty Warriors, Dragon Quest Builders, which if you haven't played Dragon Quest Builders before, it's basically like Dragon Quest meets Minecraft, and it's an absolute blast. A lot of charm there. Love that game so much. Entwined, as I was talking about, Earth Defense Force. You had Final Fantasy X and X-2 on here, which was absolutely mind-blowing at the time to see those games running and so flawlessly on a handheld machine. Fruit Ninja, because you can't go wrong with Fruit Ninja. Freedom Wars, which was like an insane twist on Monster Hunter. Please play Freedom Wars if you never played it before. Again, with the amazing indies like Fez, and then Gravity Rush. Gravity Rush is such a good game, and I'm so glad that not only did they remaster it on PS4, but that the game also got a sequel, because that's one of the things about the PlayStation Vita era, and even some of the eras before that, where if you had a game that wasn't necessarily selling big numbers like, say, God of War, it wasn't necessarily guaranteed that it was going to be shown any sort of acknowledgement really moving forward, whether it be through remasters or new games. But I'm glad Gravity Rush got the support, despite the fact that it started life on the PlayStation Vita. And it's unfortunate because even for some games that were selling like hotcakes, like Killzone and Resistance and such, because those games were huge at the time, Sony just kind of dropped support on them after a while, and that's really sad. And then you have some of the collections we were talking about, like God of War and all that. You got the God Eater games, which are really cool. Hotline Miami, the first Helldivers. Then you got ports of some amazing fighting games on here, like Injustice, Gods Among Us, Mortal Kombat 9, which, again, that's another situation where, especially for a game like Injustice, you know, in 2013, also releasing on the PlayStation Vita, just mind-blowing. Seeing games that are running at like full HD on the home consoles at the time, like the Wii U, 360, and PS3, also running on a handheld like this, like just incredible. Jet Set Radio, the Jak and Daxter collection, a whole ton of LEGO games, and if you guys know me, I love my LEGO games. Little Deviants, Little Big Planet, PlayStation Vita, which is hands down one of my favorite Little Big Planet games. The way that they utilize the hardware of the PlayStation Vita to where it didn't even feel like a gimmick. When you were using the touchscreen and the touchpad to interact with different parts of the environment, none of it ever felt like a gimmick. It felt like it belonged in the game, which is amazing because obviously when you have a handheld like this with so many, I guess you could say, niche or quote-unquote gimmicky features, it's real easy for them to start to feel kind of gimmicky, right? Like, you know, when you're waggling the Wiimote back and forth, like that can start to feel gimmicky in certain games where it's like, all right, why do I need to waggle this every time just to have Donkey Kong pound the ground? You know what I mean? But in Little Big Planet, like that was a game where I was like, okay, this actually belongs and adds to the experience, and that's how you know that a quote-unquote gimmick is good. And that's how I feel about like the PS4 and PS5, for example. Like a lot of times where games on there will utilize gyro or the HD rumble, or, you know, I look like Astro's Playroom with all the ways it utilize the remote, whether you're moving it or, you know, playing with the touchpad or kind of like moving the controller around to feel how many Astros are rolling around in there. Like that's using a quote-unquote, what could be a quote-unquote gimmicky feature and turning it into something that doesn't feel gimmicky and is instead enhancing the experience, which is amazing. And then just to go on talking about how many amazing IPs were represented here on the PlayStation Vita. MotorStorm, Mod Nation Racers, Monkey Ball, Muramasa Rebirth. Then you had Minecraft PlayStation Vita Edition, which is essentially just like the 360 or PS3 version, just on the PS Vita. Then you had more amazing console ports like Need for Speed Most Wanted, some of the Ninja Gaiden games. And if you know anything about the alphabet, you know we're getting close to the P's, which means we're going to be talking about one of the big ones here in a moment. But then you got other games like the Odd World was very well represented here on the PlayStation Vita. Some of the Ollie Ollie games. Odin Sphere, I'm not exactly sure how to say it correctly. Lifthrasir, whatever. You know, I've been playing that game since the PS2 days, and yet I still can't properly pronounce it despite the fact that I've beaten that game like a handful of times at this point. I'll learn how to say it one day. And then you had a port of Plants vs. Zombies, just because Plants vs. Zombies was on everything at the time. PlayStation All-Stars, which for those that don't know, that was essentially like PlayStation's take on like Super Smash Bros. And the fact that they only did one game on that and never even decided to re-release it, it's just despicable. If they would bring that back nowadays, could you imagine? What if they did it with like that? Like, would they do it in a cartoon art style, or would they do it hyper realistic like most of their first party games? If so, that means we could technically see Spider-Man fighting Ellie along with Kratos, and maybe even Ratchet and Clank. And then not only do you have Persona 3, Persona 4, and Persona 5 all technically represented here with the Persona 3, 4, and 5 dancing games, but then you also have Persona 4 Golden. Oh my gosh, just saying that name. Oh gosh, the memories, nostalgia, everything's flowing through. Got the soundtracks played in my head, it's going. All right. Oh man, something's telling me I'm gonna need to start up another PlayStation Vita Persona 4 Golden playthrough here soon. But Persona 4 Golden, what do I even say about this game that hasn't already been said before? It is an absolutely amazing, like, it's one of those games where if you haven't played it, I'm scared to say anything because I don't want to spoil it for you. So the only way that I can really say anything about this game is to keep it as bare as possible, because I really feel like with this game especially, just because not only with how long it is, but also just how much there is to chew on, like right out the gate. Okay, I'm just gonna say this. If you want characters to fall in love with, I mean, really, you could go with any Persona game and you do just fine, but Persona 4 is definitely, like, it's one of those games where by the time the credits roll, you're going to be crying because you don't want to say goodbye to your best friends and, you know, everybody you've come to know and love. The soundtrack in this game, it's as amazing as it is in any other Persona game. It's one of those ones where when somebody passes you the aux in the car, you're going to turn on the Persona 4 Golden OST, whether you realize it or not. And above all else, if you want just some classic turn-based RPG fun, Persona 4 Golden, baby. It is worth noting that, as with most Persona games, it can suck up a lot of time, anywhere from the high end of the double-digit numbers to, in my case, the triple or quad-digit numbers. Not in one playthrough. It's just that, you know, I mean, for one playthrough, yes, it will take you dozens of hours, but, you know, the only reason that I'm near the quad hours, if not already past it, is because, well, I've played it a lot. Just some other games we can point out here. Ratchet & Clank Full Frontal Assault, the Ratchet & Clank Collection, Ridge Racer! You guys remember that one? That is like an iconic showcase in PlayStation history, man. Let me tell you, for the PSP. Run Sackboy Run, which was also on the PS3. That was a fun little experiment. Resogun, I forget if I already said that. That game, yeah, like, that's one of those Housemarque games, and Housemarque has always been one of my favorite Sony PlayStation developers. Their games are so creative. You have games like that, and like Matterfall, for example. Like, you know, their games, it's one of those things where they seem to be relatively niche or just kind of unknown in the grand scheme of things, and it's really a shame because they really do just harken back to those classic, like, arcadey days of video games, but I absolutely love it because it's just, it's one of those things where, like, yes, it's like drop in and drop out kind of fun, but at the same time, it's, you know, their games always require a certain level of skill. It's, how's that saying go? Easy to learn, hard to master. Then you had more awesome ports like Rayman Origins and Rayman Legends, which were, again, like console Rayman games, or Assassin's Burning Skies, Resident Evil Revelations 2. More amazing RPGs with, like, Revenant Saga and Romancing Saga and stuff like that. Now we're down in the S's. All the Sly Cooper games, literally all of them were represented here. You had a cool spin-off of Silent Hill with Silent Hill Book of Memories, which was essentially like a Diablo version of Silent Hill, which I always thought was really cool. Street Fighter X Tekken, the SteamWorld Dig, SteamWorld Heist, a bunch of Sword Art Online, a bunch of Samurai Warriors, which is essentially a spin-off of like the Dynasty Warriors games, Super Meat Boy, Stardust, the Walking Dead Telltale games, as well as the Wolf Among Us Telltale game, the Amazing Spider-Man, which we already talked about, Tearaway, which was also another amazing PlayStation Vita exclusive platformer for a time. It's kind of a platformer, more or less like a puzzle platformer, I guess, but thankfully that one was also ported to the PlayStation 4 with Tearaway Unfolded, so if you want to play that game nowadays but don't have a PS Vita, that would be a great way to do it. I do believe it's available on the PS Plus Extra and Premium service. Touch My Katamari, Terraria, Suikoden, The Binding of Isaac Rebirth, obviously, just legendary game right there. Tales of Hearts R, Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom, Undertale, Uncharted Golden Abyss, Unit 13, which is a really underrated one. I might have forgotten to mention Breach and Clear earlier, which I have on here. That game's awesome. Valkyria Revolution, the Wipeout 2048, which if you haven't played a Wipeout game before, that's another series that's pretty underrated in the grand scheme of things nowadays. More people talked about it back then, but not as much nowadays. World of Final Fantasy, you got some Worms games on here. XCOM, Enemy Unknown, Xenocrisis, some of the Ys games, which if you've never played Ys, that's another one where it's like, oh man, you gotta check those out, and there's gonna be a perfect time to do it because Ys 10 is gonna be coming out here soon, finally in the States. It already released in Japan, but it'll be making its way stateside, so yeah, Ys 10 Nordics. But for anybody curious, the ones on the PS Vita are Ys 8, Ys Memory of Salsetta, and Ys Origin. And then another one that I wanted to highlight real quick is, well, not only the Zero Escape games, which I also just saw in my Z folder there, those games are really fun as well, but because I have it in my hashtag folder, which just means that it starts with like a non-character, is Root Letter. It's an amazing visual novel. It's not too long either, you could easily beat over the course of a weekend, but amazing story, amazing mystery. It's one of those games where you're going to start it and you're not going to want to put it down until you see how everything plays out and how it ends. It's such an amazing visual novel. Definitely give Root Letter a chance, or at least watch a playthrough of it if you haven't before, because that one is so overlooked and so underrated. It is a fantastic game, but I could go on and on. That is literally just scratching the surface of the games that I have on my PlayStation Vita, because, you know, if I would have ran through every single game, it would have taken double the length, but I really just wanted to emphasize, like, how many amazing experiences just from those few dozen that I listed off are to be had on the PlayStation Vita, and it's part of why I miss the system so much, because you, again, had so many amazing experiences that were ported directly from consoles, but then you also had so many that were just exclusive to the PS Vita, whether it be at the time or to this day, or ended up being ported to other consoles down the line just because of how amazing the games that themselves were. And that's not even to mention the fact that the PS Vita is basically multiple consoles in one, because you have access to the entire PlayStation Portable library on here, as well as the PlayStation 1. And if you want to start modding and emulating things, dude, you can easily emulate SNES, NES, Neo Geo, TurboGrafx, PS1, well, PS1 isn't even emulation, well, it's technically emulation, but, you know, you can already run that on there natively, but you know what I mean, like, any of those, like, 32 and 16-bit systems for the most part, I'm sure this thing could probably run N64, I might be wrong about that, but I don't see why it couldn't. There's literally, like, GTA 3 PlayStation Vita ports running at the moment. They're not official by any means, but they're still making it run on the system, so I'm sure you could do, like, any of those systems, but seriously, there's so much emulation potential there if you want to get into that, on top of the systems that I already mentioned with the PSP and PS1 that it already officially supports, as well as all the cross-buy PS3, PS4, and PS Vita games, and thankfully to this day, the store is still up and active on the PlayStation Vita, so if you pick one up today, you can still buy all those games legitimately, and if you want to go out and buy the PlayStation Vita cartridges, I'm not gonna lie, it's a little expensive to collect for the system, so you might want to be selective there, or at least make sure you have a good bit saved up. The PlayStation Vita itself is not relatively expensive in the grand scheme of, I don't want to say retro hardware, because the Vita is definitely not retro, but it's definitely getting a bit up there in age. It is 12 years old at this point. Yeah, it's definitely not expensive as it could be, you know, only a little over $100 maybe, but it's definitely worth the cost investment between the quality of the hardware that you're getting. On top of the games itself, also worth mentioning if you do decide to pick up the Vita, I personally have the 2000 Slim model. That's just the one that I prefer for a couple of reasons, and I'm just gonna say it outright. Neither model of the PlayStation Vita is objectively better or worse. For me personally, and this is going to be a hot take that I'm not expecting anybody else to share, this is just me and my eyes. I don't know what it is. It's just something about my eyes. My eyes don't do good with OLEDs, and I'm not really sure why. Like, when I play on my Nintendo Switch OLED, I can only play on it for so long before my eyes just start to feel really tired. You know, like my parents, they have a big old 4K OLED TV, and for some reason when I play on it or just watch it for too long, it just starts to mess with my eyes for a bit, so my eyes just do better with LCDs. So when I say this, just know that this is completely subjective for me, but I prefer LCDs over OLEDs, and the PlayStation Vita 1000 model does have an OLED, whereas the PlayStation Vita 2000 model, the Slim, has a LCD screen. But I've looked at both of them side by side, and while you can tell a difference when they're side by side, it is so slight that it is not going to impact your experience. Furthermore, I feel like there was a lot of quality of life improvements on top of just a lot of hardware improvements when it came to the 2000 2000. You know, there's been a lot of weird stories between, like, you know, GPU crashes on the 1000, or certain, like, you know, like burn-in elements or blackenings with the OLEDs, and like weird artifacts on the OLEDs, because they are older OLEDs before the OLED was really like a mainstream thing, you know what I mean? It was one of the real first cracks at OLEDs in a mainstream piece of hardware, at least in the gaming scene. So there is some growing pains there in some scenarios. I'm not saying it's going to be the case for everybody, because you might be watching this with a 1000 being like, what are you talking about? My 1000s work fine since day one. And that's completely okay. I'm just talking about in some of the experiences that I've read about online, that I've seen in videos, and that people I have known have experienced and that I've seen with my very own eyes. Whereas with the 2000, I've never heard of such things. And again, I'm not saying that it's going to be the case for everybody or even anybody, because, you know, again, it's one of those situations where it's going to depend on the piece of hardware that you acquire, how well it's been taken care of, how well you take care of it, just how, you know, sturdy the hardware was when it was built, you know what I mean? Like, you know, because obviously there's variables with each system, even though it goes on a manufacturing line, there's always going to be variables, there's always going to be faulty systems. So you might get a 2000 and it might just simultaneously combust while you're using it. It's really hard to say. But for me personally, the 2000, there's just, you know, there's so many nice things about it, between the form factor and the way that it feels to use. The 1000 is still very comfortable, of course, but it's a bit more hefty, whereas the 2000, it feels just right in terms of the way that it feels, between the weight. It's just a very comfortable system. They also made the touchpad on the back a lot smaller, so you're not accidentally touching it all the time, which was something I always, it always happened when I was using the 1000 model. They got rid of the proprietary charging port on the 1000, so you can actually just use a standard micro USB cable in here, which is very appreciated. And the battery life is also a good bit longer on here, not substantially to where it's like, okay, this is going to be like the make it or break a difference, but you can get an extra like hour or two depending on what you're doing on the 2000. But again, depends on what you're doing. If you're playing an intensive game, at that point the battery life, I mean I don't know, even then though, like the battery life has always been really good for me. Like I've always been able to get, like, I want to say, like, something like Uncharted, for example, I was able to run that for, like, the majority of a day before I'd even have to worry about plugging it in, and even then I could have ran it for a bit longer. So for me personally, I do just kind of prefer the 2000, but I would always recommend that you do your own research before making purchases. Do not just take my word for it. Watch reviews. Watch comparison videos. Compare prices online. If you get a good deal on one, it might be worth considering, even if you're looking at a different model. Just buy the one that you want at a good price and do your own research. I'm just giving my own personal experience and things that I have seen in the past. But that being said, I feel like that kind of starts to wrap up some of my thoughts. Oh, also, it is worth mentioning that the PS Vita comes in a lot of different colors. Some beautiful light blue colors, especially, that have always tickled my fancy, always kind of caught my attention, but I'm the type of guy where I just want that, you know, that's just how I am. I like black systems. I mean, obviously for some examples like the PS5, it only comes in white, and if you want to get it in black, you have to replace some of the faceplates, and I don't really like doing that. I just like having consoles or systems as they are at default, just kind of like either black or white if that's the only options. Like my Switch OLED and my PS5, those are white. My Xbox, my PlayStation 3, my 360, all that stuff, the original Xbox, PS2, all of those are black. But anyways, yeah, that's kind of where we're going to leave it for now. I really miss the PlayStation Vita and that era, and I have so many memories with it between just, I mean, whether it be playing it by myself or playing it with like my cousins and my friends back in the day, or I remember like, you know, playing Lego Batman 2 on it and Minecraft and stuff like that. It's just, oh man, the PlayStation Vita, such an amazing system, between the ports from console games to it, as well as the games that were just exclusive to it. Such an amazing system. And now that PlayStation has started to kind of dabble back in the handheld territory with the PlayStation Portal, who knows, maybe one day we could see a dedicated handheld. Also considering the fact that it's worked so well for Nintendo this last generation, I expect Microsoft and Sony to make a bit of a push towards it. We've already heard leaks and rumors that Microsoft might be working on something, just to kind of date this video a little bit. So who knows, maybe by the time you guys are seeing this 5-10 years in the future, maybe that's already a reality, or maybe not. Hopefully so, though. I would love to see not only Xbox but also Sony kind of jump back in the ring and give us another PlayStation Vita of sorts, or, you know, just another PlayStation dedicated handheld that isn't a streaming device. But anyways, that's where we'll leave things. Now, I genuinely love to hear from you guys. Do you guys have any sort of like nostalgic memories with the PS Vita? You know, I'm not trying to do the typical YouTuber thing where I'm like, oh, comment for the engagement. No, like genuinely, if you look at any of my other videos, I respond to as many comments as I can. I genuinely just love having those fun and nostalgic conversations with you guys. So if you could do that, it made my day. I love getting to chat with you guys and just talk about these fun and nostalgic topics, because, you know, that's part of the reason why I make videos in the first place, because not only do I love making the videos and love the things that I'm talking about, but I also love just getting to interact with you guys. So yeah, I'll leave it to you. But anyway, as always, massive shout out thank you to all the Patrons and channel members, thank you to all the low ball tier, and major shout out thank you to all the big ball tier, my last name is Dad, my name is Shut that on T tier, run events, someone she's cool. Thank you guys so much, you guys are literal legends. I love you. Thank you guys for watching. Have an amazing day, stay beautiful. I love you all. Peace.